Coronavirus.
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 The number of cases soaring just today.
The virus is spreading rapidly.
We don't have what we need to fight this.
As people panic over coronavirus and clamor to give more power to the governments that failed to keep them safe from it in the first place, the ruling class is doing what it does best, using fear and distraction as an excuse to seize even more control. While lockdowns and emerging methods to enforce them, from one police department employing drones to local governments encouraging people to tattle on others, are front and center and widely accepted, as is Trump's activation of a wartime law. Many other power grabs are happening as people are understandably consumed with coronavirus fears. When the panic was first hitting, the House of Representatives was busy voting to pass the USA Freedom Act reauthorization, a doublespeak bill recodifying one of the worst provisions of the Patriot Act, Section 215. This allows broad collection of Americans' private information and phone calls and fails to prohibit the government from collecting other types of sensitive records, including web browsing and search history, the ACLU and Freedom Works said in their objection to it. Disappointingly, the reforms contained in H.R. 6172 are minimal and in many cases merely represent a codification of the status quo. Nonetheless, it's been sent to the Senate, which delayed the vote but issued a 77-day extension of spying powers in the meantime. At the same time, senators were busy holding a hearing for the Earn It Act, a sneaky attempt cloaked in claims of helping the children to kill encryption, which enables truly private, secure communication and which the government has been trying to destroy for years. Though the bill doesn't contain the word encryption, it would force companies to scan all messages sent on their platforms using government-approved screening technology and allow the government to bankrupt them if they don't comply. This would effectively give the government access to all private messages. In direct response to coronavirus, Trump's Department of Justice petitioned Congress to craft legislation giving chief judges and district courts the right to indefinitely detain citizens during national emergencies, including whenever the district court is fully or partially closed by virtue of any natural disaster, civil disobedience, or other emergency situation. Though Congress rejected the measure, the fact that the Department of so-called Justice thinks they should have this power at all, in addition to the government's existing congressionally approved indefinite detention powers, is egregious enough. Corporatist companies eager for government contracts are also ramping up efforts to impose further surveillance. From the Electronic Frontier Foundation, companies like Clearview AI, which uses over 2 billion face images scraped from social media to track individuals and identify them with real-time face surveillance, are already in talks with agencies to provide assistance. Even as civil liberties groups call for a national ban on government use of face recognition, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is currently touting face recognition at airport check-ins as supposedly more hygienic than other screening. Additionally, the White House is in talks with massive tech companies to use location data to track movement amid the virus outbreak, a power that could quickly spiral into far more extensive overreach. Meanwhile, a sweeping gun control bill introduced in the House at the end of January took its next step in the legislative process as the corona panic was heating up. The bill, which seeks among numerous restrictions to ban assault weapons, a policy that failed to stop mass shootings in the 90s, and expand growing red flag gun seizure practices, which undermine basic due process and empower the police state, was sent to a subcommittee, moving forward toward passage. While it may not pass now, it's yet another example of the government's relentless attempts to amass ever more control. And amid all these quiet attempts at usurpations, which really just follow and accelerate the trajectory the government's been on for decades, those in power are continuing their other business as usual. The military is still escalating war and preparing for it. Police are still getting away with brutalizing people in the streets. And politicians are still ensuring entrenched industries are getting spoils from the taxpayers as the dollar becomes increasingly worthless thanks to the state-sanctioned Federal Reserve's central planning and creation of cash to lend to big banks. These power grabs happen in times of rampant fear and panic, often when it comes to war. And unsurprisingly, politicians are referring to coronavirus as a war to be won.
We will win this war, and we'll win it much sooner than people think.
After Woodrow Wilson and the federal government fear-mongered Americans into supporting World War I with an official propaganda campaign, he imposed sweeping anti-free speech laws, one of which is still on the books and used to this day. During World War II, Americans terrified by Pearl Harbor happily gave up due process and civil liberties to throw Japanese immigrants and Americans of Japanese ancestry into camps, and the government continues to claim indefinite detention powers to this day. During the Cold War, when Americans feared nuclear annihilation, even though their own government was the only one to kill innocents with these weapons, the government created blacklists, ruining careers and livelihoods, often with little more than accusations. The FBI spied and launched its COINTELPRO operation in the name of war with communism and then used it to infiltrate activist movements. After 9/11, we got the Patriot Act, which is used more in the drug war than the war on terror, the PRISM surveillance program, increased government secrecy, the groping TSA, and the Department of Homeland Security it operates within. To be clear, I'm not discussing these developments to add to the fear-mongering. Rather, my intention is to raise awareness so we can push back against them in the name of ideals we cherish. It would still be wise to take care not to spread the virus to vulnerable people, even if you aren't personally at risk. Not because your government is forcing you to, but out of care and compassion and respect for your fellow humans, which in my opinion is essential to freedom. But both history and current events show the grave implications of letting fears run so high you beg corrupt, violent institutions that never stop lusting for power to take even more control over you. Do you really think they'll give back the power they're trying to seize if you let them take it now?